welcome back to my video series ranking every Genesis song and providing brief reviews. This is numbers 19 to 11, so we really are quite close now to the end. Just one more video to come following this one. Once again, thank you so much to everybody who's been paying attention to all the encouragement and thoughts that I've received. Now, I don't think any of the choices will be too surprising this time, apart maybe from number 11. The top 10, when I get to that in a couple weeks, that has some pretty personal, idiosyncratic choices, but this is probably about as close to consensus picks as I can really imagine. Even the wild cards are, I think, within an acceptable range. Now, in general, I've staggered these to go up every other week, but this week's planned video fell through. I was going to do a feature on the meaning of the song Radar Love, in particular, several different possible interpretations of the line, "One more radar lover gone," which is something that I've puzzled over since I was a teenager, right? What does he say about that, and how does that actually kind of change the underlying story of the song? And I swear I had looked everywhere that I could think of and not found any kind of an answer to what that line's actually referring to. So I had the talking points pretty much all laid out for the video. I was just getting ready to shoot, and I happened to go look the song up on Wikipedia just because I wanted to confirm something about my memory of the personnel on it. And it says right there in the Wikipedia entry what the song means, and even has a link to an interview with Barry Hay. So there goes my video. As always, I'm Hans from Electric Brain Electric Shadow. We're a contemporary art rock project which makes music that is complex but accessible, emotionally nuanced, and focused on melody and atmosphere. Number 19, I have Heathaze, leading off with what I think might be the only controversial choice in this particular batch. I'm sure everybody likes this song, but I'm not sure if even very devoted fans of this album or this period would say this one is absolutely top rank, right? But I am personally hugely attached to this song, and, I'll go to bat for it any day. Now, Tony's writing is criticized sometimes for being a little awkward, a little too cerebral maybe for its own good, but I think when it does connect, emotionally, there's an extra level of depth that comes from the intelligence that he writes with, even if that intelligence can also sometimes be a barrier to connecting. And the lyric in this case has kind of a meandering quality, right, where it skirts, it misdirects, it loses its train of thought, it gets caught up in odd metaphors and references to feeding ducks. And it seems like for some people that opaque quality is a barrier to connecting with this song. But the melody is so emotive, the production has such depth, Phil's delivery of the lyric has such intensity and punch, that I think the inability to say something direct kind of ends up enhancing that feeling of lost, of despairing, of being dangerously uncertain. The result to me is something that over time has grown to be profoundly moving because of, rather than despite, its oddity and its elliptical nature. Number 18, I have Mama. This is, out of all the trio songs, probably the one that I think has the most interesting light to shed on the general nature of collaboration. However you might feel about Mike and the Mechanics, they're generally not known either for sonic experimentation or for intensity. So it was really interesting to me to find out that Mike Rutherford was responsible for the drum loop that opens the song, which basically is industrial music before that was codified as a genre, at least in the mainstream. It's also interesting that Phil was responsible for the grim, kind of quasi-Oedipal lyric, which conceptually seems like it would be more in Tony's wheelhouse, even though Phil writes it in a much more direct way than Tony would have. And of course, when the live drums come in, it's a drum sound that was famously created for a Peter Gabriel album. It's ultimately Phil's idea, but that sound wouldn't have existed without Peter's artistic priorities. The point of all this is that when collaboration is working best, and I do think that in this song that collaborative nature is working as well here as it ever did for these guys, it's not a matter of combining the qualities of the collaborating artists, but of bringing something out of those artists which they wouldn't otherwise know existed in themselves. And I think that that's a psychologically intimate act, right, which can be intensely pleasurable. Witness the general fondness that the band members all seem to have for each other in this period, or it can be intensely uncomfortable. Witness the number of great albums made by bands who broke up immediately thereafter. Now, to be fair, all of these thoughts are tangential to this song itself, which, as a performance, as an act of sonic creation, is, I think, essentially perfect. It's just a wonderful piece of grim little melodrama. The only other thing I might say about it is it's a great rebuttal to the idea you hear sometimes that something isn't really a good song if it can't convincingly be brought across just by one person with an acoustic guitar. Number 17, I have Twilight Alehouse. It's funny how during the prog era, the B-sides often seem to deal with more grounded concerns than the album tracks. From Trick of the Tail, you have It's Yourself, which is a pretty straightforward love song. From Wind and Wuthering, you have Inside and Out, which is about a rape trial, a song about pigeons, a song about sports. And then, of course, there's this dark little song about loneliness and alcoholism, where the emotional earnestness, I think, is really what sells the song and also what makes it distinctive within their early catalog. The verse is just about as sad and forlorn as Peter really ever managed to sound during the Genesis days. And the aggressive mood of the chorus, I think, is a really perfect match for the dark, corrupted excitement of an alcoholic making bad decisions. The ending buildup is as heavy as anything from the Gabriel era, and it's quite satisfying to hear them allow themselves to just thrash out simple chords. Now, I may be overrating this a bit due to its relative obscurity, but there's a straightforwardly dark power in this song that stands alone in this period, and I might suggest that in fact it's everybody else who's underrating it. Number 16, I've put Home by the Sea, Second Home by the Sea. I'm combining those functionally into one, which is what the band always did in performance. Now, in general, I probably haven't been quite as kind to the pop-era epics as some people might have expected. In particular, I think I'm less partial to Domino and Tonight, Tonight, Tonight than a lot of other fans of the band. And one thing I've talked about with those songs is what seems to be, to me at least, a mismatch a little bit of sound and style, a way that the sounds and production choices of this era strip some of the dynamics and fullness away from the more epic pieces. This is a place where that balance works, right? Where the starker sounds feel emotionally right within the lyrical mood. Tony's pads in particular really capture the eeriness here of the setting. And aside from the question of sound, this is a piece that just really balances the best strengths of the early and late work. It has the rhythmic drive of the best later material. For instance, there's something quite seductive in that syncopated bass line in the beginning. And the supernatural narrative in the lyric is very close to something they might have written in the early 70s, but it's presented in a more emotionally plain way, and it's one of the most affecting instances of Phil's emotive delivery absolutely nailing an awkward Tony lyric that he probably hated. So this is among the best pieces in their whole catalog, I think, at combining the most creative impulses of their younger selves with the best new tricks and skills that they'd acquired in early middle age. Number 15, I've put Stagnation. Now, The Knife is usually cited as the standout song on Trespass, and certainly it's more exciting, more technically accomplished, maybe a little bit more accessible than this. But ultimately, the two qualities that I find most appealing in any kind of Genesis work are going to be melody and atmosphere, and this is among the best they ever did in both regards. The seed of the whole Gabriel era is here, right? That tapestry of acoustic guitar, the eerie organ solo, the slow build-up and then the abrupt drawdown, the evocative lyric that doesn't totally make sense unless you've read the booklet, and then, of course, that deceptively catchy melody at the end, which snuck into live medleys for decades afterward. It's a very small detail, but I think there's something in particular to be said for that little trick Tony does where the organ makes a downward pitch when you turn the power switch off. It only accounts for maybe, 7% of the song's overall atmosphere and power, but I think it signals an interest in creative sound crafting and the smart use of machinery that you can, start at and draw a line all the way to, for instance, the drum machine at the beginning of Mama. So this song is eerie and surreal and beautiful, and at the same time, it set a template for what would define much of the rest of the decade, and in some ways even the rest of their careers. Number 14, I've put The Lamb Lies Down on Broadway. Now, this is a song that I would say is properly rated, right? I'm not sure there's even that much left to say about it, but I just have to point out a few obvious things. That opening cross-handed piano pulse is about as iconic an instrumental moment as anything in their career. The lyrics' kind of city phantasmagoria is a perfect introduction to the story of the Lamb, but at the same time is disconnected enough from the narrative that it's continued to work very well as a freestanding piece. Mike's chunky bass is one of my favorite elements of the whole Lamb album, and it's used about as well here as anywhere except maybe Lily White Lilith. And I'm also quite partial, of course, to the Seconds Out version, which ramps up the tempo, ramps up the intensity, really kicks about as much ass as they ever did in their career. Number 13, I've put Fly on a Windshield / Broadway Melody of 1974. I've never really been quite sure on where the exact boundary is between these two pieces, and ultimately they really rely on each other for maximum impact and have kind of become one composition in my mind. The way Rail's reality gradually unwinds into a quiet nightmare and then pauses, and then that great big wonderful wallop when the big guitars and drums come in. If you're playing early Genesis for someone who is not a fan of progressive rock, this is, I have found through experience, one of the most effective choices you can make. I also just love the unconventional dynamic shape where you start at full intensity and over the course of the piece gradually wind down and down and down to a whisper. That's an inversion of the normal build-up, and one of my favorite underused arrangement ideas. Now, the title track from this album has, of course, had a little bit more life in concert and outside of the album context. But for me, this is really the moment where The Lamb Lies Down on Broadway as an album piece really announces itself as a momentous thing. And it makes a strong enough impression on a first-time listen that it encourages the kind of repeated attention and open-minded analysis that is required to break the whole album open. So in that sense, I think it's about as key in the sequencing as really any piece on the album. Number 12, I've put In the Cage. Now, this song is energetic as hell. It's delirious. It's perversely catchy. Like all the classic stuff, it's so full of great little details in the playing that I can't really begin to pick them all out. I'm truly stumped to find much of anything to say about it, but I don't think anybody will be too surprised to see it land where it does. Lamb has been one of my favorite albums for more than 20 years, and now, just listening to it a little bit earlier to come up with something to say about it, is the first time in all that time that I've noticed how great the bass playing is, which is exemplary, I think, of how packed both the song and the album are of wonderful musical information. Number 11, I've put Watcher of the Skies. We are, of course, at a point in the list where we're arguably in kind of a massive tie. The idea of putting this above or below, say, In the Cage, is ultimately kind of arbitrary, right? But what puts this above everything else that's come so far for me is, it's predictable to say it, but that goddamn Mellotron intro. I just mentioned both melody and atmosphere in the Stagnation review, but in terms of aesthetic priorities, I probably value atmosphere above all else personally, and that kind of seance of drone is as great a chunk of atmosphere really as anything they ever did. But everything after that is perfect as well in the most characteristic way. I love that nimble churning rhythm. I love all the tight starts and stops. I love the lyric that is so jammed full of consonants that Peter can barely fit it in his mouth. The song really is the ultimate display of the true alien majesty of the classic period in every sense of that word. All right, everybody, just one video left where we'll be counting down the top 10. Thanks, as always, for your thoughts. Your likes and comments are very helpful in continuing to do this and feel gratified by it. Next week, if I have time, I'm going to try to put together a review of the Van de Graaff Generator Charisma Years box set. I don't know for sure if I'll have enough time between now and then to really consider the material in the depth that it deserves, but that's my goal. As always, check out Electric Brain Electric Shadow on Bandcamp or your favorite streaming service, and I hope everybody has a good week.